Morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Audit Committee. Do we have any apologies?
No, there's no apologies. All the members are present.
Thank you. Is there any declarations of interest from anyone? No, good. Thirdly, the minutes. Is there anyone got any issues with the minutes, or I'll be happy to agree them? Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Then we go on to final item, internal audit assurance. Isabel, if you'd like to present, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this report is the 22-23 Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report. The purpose of the report is to summarise the work Internal Audit have undertaken over the course of the year and to provide an overall opinion on the Council's arrangements for risk management, governance and control based on that work. The report also comments on our compliance with public sector internal audit standards. As you can see from section 2, I asked the Audit Committee to note that sufficient internal audit work was undertaken to support a balanced assurance and that internal audit can provide substantial assurance on the IGIB's arrangements for risk management, governance and control for the year to the 31st of March 2023. In addition, I can report that internal audit met or exceeded its key performance indicators. Section 3 of the report explains that the 22-23 internal audit plan included an audit of savings and transformation tracking ongoing from 2021-22. Paragraph 3.3 highlights that the plan set out 20 assignment areas as well as the ongoing review from 21-22, giving a total of 21 assignments. A summary of the status of the 14 audit reports, both completed and not yet completed, is set out at paragraph 3.4 with a summary of all assignments at Appendix 2. The scope of and the findings arising from each finalised assignment is set out at Appendix 3. Paragraph 3.7, you can see internal audit performance against the 3 key performance indicators. Actual performance exceeded the target for all 3 indicators, although the percentage completion of the internal audit plan had dropped slightly from last year. Section 4 of the report comments on our compliance with public sector internal audit standards. These set out the principles and practices that we must comply with, and every year we're required to undertake a self-assessment against those standards. The review was undertaken by myself during March 23. There's also a 5-year external assessment, which the section last underwent during 2018, and we were found to be compliant at that time. A further external validation will be undertaken by the Scottish Local Authorities Chief Internal Auditors Group later in this year. This self-assessment has given reassurance that we operate in line with the standards and there's not been any real or apparent impairment of independence or objectivity relating to the audit work. So internal audit operated throughout 2022-23 with no impairments or restrictions in independence. So in conclusion, internal audit undertook sufficient work during 22-23 to support a balanced and evidence-based opinion that substantial assurance could be placed on the Council's arrangements for risk management, governance and control. In providing this opinion, internal audit operated in compliance with the public sector internal audit standards with no impairments or restrictions to independence. Thank you. I'll try and answer any questions you've got.
Thank you, Isabel. Cecil?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Isabel, for that, and thanks for the report and the team pulling us together. Just wanted to ask a wee bit about the reports that are completed, and there seems to be a fair number that are completely, completed at an early stage in the year. But there's obviously the 14 that are outstanding. Just wondered if you were confident that you would be able to continue to meet the timescales and actually deliver on the audit report this year. because I was aware that last year we had some significant issues around resources, and just wondered if there was any lag over the resources, if there continues to be enough resources to be able to meet that and actually complete what's required. And the other thing is, could you maybe explain a wee bit about the self-assessment? This is probably a bit of a layperson's thing, that having a wee bit more of an understanding of what you guys go through for your self-assessment, as we've obviously got our bit to do. And if I can come back in relation to one of the reports as well, convener, but I'll maybe get answers to that first.
Isabel, do you want to answer?
Yeah, no problem. Resources, we are at full complement now, but we'll always take more resources if and when they were ever available. Not sure that's going to happen. So yes, we did have some issues last year around our resourcing. We had a couple of people who left, and it proved quite difficult, more difficult than anticipated, to fill those roles. In part just the changes, I think, post-COVID environment, and I think a lot of other local authorities are finding that now, that, and not just an internal audit function, across the board there's issues getting suitably qualified people. So that was an opportunity to restructure at that time, and we got 2 fantastic new members of staff who had some of that experience but weren't fully up to speed on current internal audit practice. They had a lot of accountancy experience, plus coming into a new area full stop, you need a bit of bedding in time. So the plan for last year definitely was aimed at taking that into account to allow them that bedding in, plus they've got ongoing training commitments too, to try and just develop that role a wee bit more. So in actual fact, we've only got 4 reports that are not completed in the final report sense. The work is actually completed on all reports for 22-23. The 4 reports are currently sitting in a draft state. So that means that the work has been completed, the reports have been written, and they're sitting with the auditees. So the 4, if I'm off the top of my head, I think, that are with auditees are Legionella, iPay, and the physical income security. The 4th one is the reciprocal agreement audit that we have with West Lothian, and in actual fact I'm the auditee in that one, and it's me that has to give the responses back to finalise that report. So for 3 of those 4 we're waiting on responses coming back, which will give us the management actions agreement that they're going to take on the recommendations, and the responsible owners, and the dates for each of those recommendations. They are all due in the next week or so. So by the next audit committee, you will have updates on all of those reports. So we are pretty much there with the 22-23 work, and in part because of what I've said about we gave that bedding in time for the 2 new members of staff, and reduced the plan slightly. I think your 3rd question was around the self-assessment. So the self-assessment is part of internal audit standards that we have to abide by. You do your self-assessment every year, and every 5 years somebody comes in and basically verifies that from an external organisation. So it's actually Fife Council that will be coming in to look at our results and to verify the information that I've pulled together. I've actually got to do the same thing for another council later in the year too. So the self-assessment itself is quite a big document. It's based on a framework of, I think it's something like 208 questions. I remember it's 50 pages long, so it's a lot to go through, and you then are picking up, a bit like what you'll be going through with the Audit Committee self-assessment, you're picking up where you potentially could improve on, things that maybe need updated. It is just a reminder. So you have that skeleton framework that you complete, and then every year you build on that with an action plan of things that you maybe want to change. So for us, things that I've added in are maybe where job titles have changed. For example, last year we restructured, that made a change to the job titles, things like that. Post-COVID, we went more to electronic working papers. and a lot more documentation held electronically rather than going out face to face. So these are the kind of things that would impact on that self-assessment, where you would be adding more detail in. So basically Fife Council will come in and look at all that information and look for the evidence to back up everything that I've said, and then they'll give us an assurance rating as to where they think that we sit. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you, Isabel. That's helpful just to have an understanding of that. And yeah, I apologise. I got the wrong way round between the 4 and the 14. So apologies for that. That was my fault. Convener, if I can maybe go on to the ask some questions around the appendix, and it may well be a mixture between Isabel and the directors for those particular items.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just in relation to the savings and the transformation tracking, we've got limited assurance there. So it's about being able to understand why we've got limited assurance and what needs to happen to bring that to substantial assurance. First question is actually, I mean, based on a review of a sample of 5 Council of the Future projects, and I was just wondering how were the 5 Council of the Future projects chosen to do that? Obviously, there's concerns around the fact that it's been generic savings targets that have been put forward, and that's obviously makes that very challenging around the financial planning. And why have we not been able to have these savings targets more quantified and more refined in order to be able to have a better indication of the Council of Future? And we're aware that there's been some challenges around particular projects, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to ask around that as well, because we need to be able to have some kind of assurance that this is going to make a difference and is going to contribute to our financial plan. And I think it goes on to talk a wee bit about that. The other aspect is that I was aware that the Council of the Future board was reviewed, and the reporting structure would come to the executive from the board, and we need to understand if that has been effective or not, because at the moment it appears it's not been overly effective, and therefore there's not been the same levels of scrutiny as previously, and just a wee bit about how we're then going to look at taking that forward, what review is going to be done, how are we going to get this back into a form that will actually be able to deliver for the council. And the only other question I've got is in relation to the leader programme, convener, and obviously within the leader programme there's some challenges, not necessarily all for ourselves but with government and the payments, but it says that there's still a balance of over 3 million in the account from as of August 22. I'm just wondering what happens to that. Do we know? But what is concerning is the unclaimable sums that gives concern that Falkirk Council could end up being liable for, and just what action are we taking to try and address that, so that we are not having to bear the brunt of any costs that are considered to be unclaimable, and understanding why they're unclaimable. I'll leave it at that because I'm sure others have got questions, convener, and there's quite a lot in there. I appreciate.
Isabel, could you first explain why it was limited assurance rated initially, and if Karen could maybe come in with the other questions Councillor Meikle-Johns raised. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I think your question was around for savings tracking, why was that sample of 5 chosen? So whenever we pick a sample, you have to try and consider how long it's going to take to work through that sample and what the extent of the audit work is going to be. So I think the first thing to probably highlight is that the review covered the period 2019-20 and up to 21-22. So trying to get the information together wasn't always easy, because there was a lot of support and information elsewhere, and trying to get the evidence to pull it together. So in picking the sample, you've got to bear that in mind to try and make sure that you're getting enough coverage over all the different services, different types, different sizes, and making sure that you have that balance overall. So that was why it was those particular 5. It didn't, some of them you will see from the information there that it wasn't easy to pull it all together. It did take a significant amount of time to try and get the data and then to try and pull it together. So I think that answers the first part. That I don't think the other 2 parts were for me, but do you want me to answer leader or do you want me to come back to leader?
We'll come back to
Okay.
leader, but we're concerned at why was it given limited assurance as your status?
It could more like, well, following on from what I've just said about the evidence, it did prove very difficult to get that supporting documentation as to where the figures came from. When we started the review, we started with a figure of 14.4 million that we were trying to work back from to be able to verify and assure that figure, and that was the bit that was very difficult. You'll see that from the very first part of the summary, we broke it down into different parts for our remit items, all the bits that we actually looked at. So the arrangements are around assessing the savings, the arrangements for planning how to deliver the project, the accuracy of the savings, and the arrangements for applying, assessing, monitoring, for example, and then the impact of the awards on the timescales. And you'll see we've given an assurance level against each of those. Now, that's not something we do on a regular basis. Normally, our report will have an assurance overall. So, but in this one, it was important to show the distinction where things were a bit better. So you'll see that the arrangements for planning how to deliver a project were a substantial assurance, but the rest were limited. So that basically means that the information to back it up just wasn't there, and we were unable to get that information back that was going to be able to take us back all the way to the 14.4 million figure.
Thank you, Isabel. If Karen, do you want to address the other issues?
Yes, thank you, convener, and thank you for bringing me in there. I think, as Isabel has said, you're aware from the report that the audit of the Council of the Future programme did relate to 2019-20 as well as 21-22. So to some level, it is historical. Now, all of the recommendations in the report have been accepted, and the reason for that is because as officers, we already recognised that a lot of the findings of the report were areas that we wanted to address, and actually we have plans in place that are addressing or have already addressed some of these findings given the historical nature of them. So I think members will recall that we did review the structure and the governance arrangements for the Council of the Future programme, and these were reported to the Executive Committee. That was about a more robust board being brought together. It now includes all directors and heads of service. There are much more refined and defined monitoring arrangements in place. It's also worth saying that our PMO and finance colleagues also review the information that come to the board, and we have much more information in terms of both the project status and their milestones, as well as the financial status of the projects. So there is an assessment now done against each of the projects about the financial rating and whether we are on track with that, which enables a much more robust discussion at the board as well. I think it's worth saying that the programme for Council of the Future is also put through a much more robust challenge. You may recall from the Executive Committee that we set, as part of the reviews we've done under best value, we set very clear criteria as to what would meet a Council of the Future programme project. So there is criteria there, and that's the criteria we now use to assess whether something is a Council of the Future project or not. And as I said, finance colleagues and PMO now work together to assess the savings that are in the project documentation, but also to review those each time we meet as a board to ensure they give it a RAG rating and tell us where we are in delivering those savings. In terms of reporting of the projects, we have taken a different approach over the last probably 6 months to a year in terms of reporting on some of those projects and where they actually are. So an awful lot of them are now coming to, for example, the Executive Committee, and some examples would be the Library Service report, which has now been signed off and we've made progress and delivered the savings. We have the SPR, which was a very complex project within the programme. That's been reported to members and will be due to come back. We have waste services, which has been reported. So those are just some examples of the change in how we're doing this and actually reporting some of these projects back to members to ensure that you have oversight of where we've got to with these as well. Some of the other recommendations in the paper were around the change fund, how we use that. We have put a more robust process in place where the board as a whole considers any change fund applications, but we've also reviewed the template in line with all of the recommendations that our audit colleagues came up with. So that's a very quick overview of some of the changes we've made, but happy to answer any further questions on that if the committee have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Could I take you back to page 15 again, looking at the areas? I'm glad that there are 4 of the audit reports have now been progressed and are near completion, so that's important, particularly the Legionella one, which is time critical. And I take your issue about lack of resources to deal with it, and I'm hoping that for the future it won't happen again. But I would like you to say a wee bit more about the 2 audit reviews that were deferred into the next year's plan. On one in particular, the fleet management and monitoring arrangements, seems to be because 8 of the 11 recommendations had not been implemented. And I wonder if you'd like to say a wee bit more about those 2 reviews and the reasons for the deferment. That's my first question. Sorry, I'll come back with the rest.
Isabel.
Yeah, okay. So the fleet audit was always going to be 2 different reports, so it was being done in 2 stages. Indeed, the procurement audit was as well. We always were going back to do significant follow-up work. The fleet one, yes, there were the 8 recommendations outstanding, and I think probably the service can give you a wee bit more information there. We will follow that up in the next review, and although it says here that the work on the 2 audits was deferred, both have actually already started in the 23-24 programme. I did decide obviously very early on when we had the last audit committee to say that we would be looking at those audits first because they had been deferred in. So this of the fleet one was always going to be a follow-up to make sure these recommendations were taken forward. So that's already started, as I've said. The second one, procurement and housing property, that was again another second report based on work that had been undertaken already, and this one was more about particular focus on contracts. But in order to do that work, there was a period of change within the department. So BMD, Building Maintenance Division, had moved over to Place Services, and that time just towards the end of that year. And also there has been a new housing system introduced, so it wasn't the right time. It wouldn't have been prudent for us to go in at that point when everything else, they were in this state of flux, to then be looking to pull that information. So that was why it was basically being postponed till the very end of the 22-23 year, and then we got to that point and said, right, that will be the first one we'll do in 23-24. So that's about picking another sample, and it's a sample of contracts and following that process through to make sure that all the steps have been completed correctly. So that sample's already been chosen, and it's with the service to provide some of that information back now. So hopefully, members, you will get some assurance that we have already started on that work and there's not going to be a big hold up. But if you want more specifics on any recommendations, I think there's the head of services here to answer.
I think that's, I would quite like the head of service to answer that bit as well, the detail on that.
Mal.
Thank
Douglas,
you,
sorry,
Convener.
go
Can I
ahead.
bring in Douglas? Yeah.
As convener, through yourself, with regards to fleet services, you may or may not be aware that obviously we've gone through quite a significant change of staff, namely a new fleet services manager, a new coordinator, and that was due to the significant change. That's the kind of real reason behind some of the delays in achieving the recommendations. I'm pleased to advise committee that all recommendations made by colleagues at Audit have been fully met. In addition to that, as Isabel clearly stated earlier on, the service is subject to a further audit this year to follow up and to verify that we're fully compliant with the actions highlighted by them. So as I say, just to reiterate, there are no outstanding actions as far as I'm concerned. We're now fully compliant, but again, that will be verified by external audits report later this year.
Okay, thank you. Can I now ask the Daft Lassie question? Could you tell me a bit more about the QAIP, the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, and explain a little bit more about that, please?
Isabel.
Yeah, it's all these names that get confusing. That's basically the self-assessment. It's the proper terminology for the self-assessment that we spoke about earlier, where I do the annual review of the 50-page, 208 questions, and then look at that at validation every 5 years. So that is quite a big piece of work to make sure all of that evidence is pulled together. It takes a couple of weeks, I think. I haven't obviously been through it before. The last time we went through it, it was 2018, and we were found to be compliant with it then. So this is the first time that I'll have gone through that. It's also going to be the first time that I'm going to be doing the same with another council. So I'm expecting to learn quite a lot from it, but I think in many ways it's like performing any kind of audit. You're getting the information, you're looking to verify and assure what comes out the other end of it. So sorry, the terminology is maybe thrown you there, but it's more or less the same thing.
That's fine, thank you very much. And just one other question. Councillor Meiklejohn asked about the leader situation and the issue of the non-collection of funds from the Scottish Government. When you were answering that, you talked about working back from the 14 million. I wonder if you could explain that, because it seems to me that it's important to have the things in place in front rather than behind the events. Does that make sense?
I don't think that was. I think that was the same question. I think the leader question is still to be answered. I think it was around account for the future.
Yeah, I can come in and answer the leader's question. Was around the fact that we had unclaimable funds from Scottish Government. Yes. So as part of, so leader is no longer in place. Leader was a review that we did every year, because part of the commitment for the funding was that it was assured by internal audit, verified again on an annual basis. So we included that as part of our annual work, as part of our annual plan, until it ended. So there's a recommendation in the audit that's around, if you're doing this kind of work again, this is what we would like to see happen. So that, it's a bit mute because leader's finished. But the other part of that is that we have these funds that were unclaimed or unclaimable, and we asked the service to have a look into that, to reconcile those figures and to make sure that whatever could be done to do that was done. I think the leader spoke about the funding figure. So yes, over 3 million was made available to the projects, and as far as I know, all of those projects, from our understanding, all of those projects were accepted and the funding was received. We just had a portion that hadn't been claimable back, but in terms of where that's sitting now, I'm not the one to give you that answer. We will look into that as a part of our normal work. As part of the reports to this committee, I obviously give you outstanding recommendations data, probably twice a year's normally what happens, and what we do at that point is make sure that anything that's looking outstanding from the recommendations point of view is chased up and implemented. And what we find sometimes is that they are implemented, but the paperwork's not maybe quite caught up with that. So it's about making sure that the performance sits in the right place and that it all gets caught up with. So we will do that as part of our outstanding recommendations work to check if these recommendations have been completed. But if you're wanting a current picture, it's probably the service.
Amanda?
In terms of the figures that are mentioned in page 7 of the agenda, there's a page. Sorry. Thank you. In terms of the figures mentioned on page 27 of the agenda, the first one is the drawdown request for £224,391.64. That's been received. That funding has been received. And then there's the figure slightly further down that paragraph of 180,000. That figure has been written off in previous years in the accounts, so we've already sort of effectively taken the hit for that in our accounts. My understanding is it relates to very early projects in Leader. So Leader started, I think it was 2014. So I think it's for some of those initial projects, which I think is, you know, the point that Isabel's making in terms of we need to go back and understand that better and then see what lessons we're going to learn from it. But we have already written those sums off in prior years, but we have received the 224,000.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you, convener.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Convener, it was just to then ask what happens to the balance, because certainly it said that there was at the 31st of August there was just over 3 million. So what happens to the rest of that funding?
Thanks, convener. I don't know if Isabel might want to come in, but my understanding is that that's not the balance, that's just the total sum that had been allocated throughout the course of the Leader project. So it's not sitting waiting to be spent, it's just that's the final tally of everything we were allocated at the end of the programme.
And therefore, has that all now been allocated, and therefore that concludes the fund?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Forrest.
Thank you. Page 25, could you please describe the process for detecting wrongly claimed council tax single persons discount? The 27 matches show just £17,000 overpayment. Recovery action has begun. Will this be fully recovered?
So the single person's discount on council tax is so the process for NFI is around the matching of the information from various systems, and then it flags up queries. So the queries could be around the fact that to claim single person discount, you should only have one adult over 18 living in the house. The systems that have generated the match, if you like, is saying that there's more than one person over the age of 18 living in the house. So that could be for any number of reasons. It could also be that one of the system's information is wrong or out of date. So basically we get these matches back and we try to investigate them. They now are rated like a high risk, a medium risk and a low risk. So we try to obviously start with the high risk ones, and that could be around the value or around the systems. So we will look into why that could be. So yes, it could be that the two systems don't have matching information, so therefore it's flagged. It could be that, and what we find in a lot of instances is that it's one of the children who has turned 18 and has become an adult, if you like. But then when we write out as part of the investigation, what we tend to find is that maybe the 18-year-old has gone into further education. So there are reasons for it, or people just have forgotten, they didn't know that, you know, oh, my child's now 18, I need to inform them. So of the matches we've already done, there is the 17,000 of recovery. So we would like to hope that we would get all of that back, but what tends to happen is that it alters the council tax owed figure. So depending how that person is paying their council tax, then this will just be an additional payment to that, or if they are in arrears, it adds to their arrears. But the figures, the 17,000 are obviously added on, and they are treated as then part of the normal payments that have to be made back.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks.
Councillor Patrick.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to refer to the heading of the continuous auditing. That's on page 24. And this was explaining about duplicate payments. You're looking for duplicate payments that have been made, really quite large amounts and quite large figures. Although, you know, it's quite comforting to see that, you know, quite significant amounts are actually being recovered when that's been discovered. You know, and I appreciate we must make thousands and thousands of payments as a council certainly every year, probably even every month or so. Are we sort of satisfied that procedures are in place to stop these duplicate payments? Because some do appear that they probably have been quite significant. You know, to pay I don't know, an invoice or whatever twice for significant amounts, that is quite concerning. And it'd be much better to stop the payments to start with rather than have to do the recovery. So are we kind of satisfied we have procedures in place that we can improve on that to try and avoid these in future?
Yeah. The figures, when you do read it, the figures certainly do, you know, they do stand out, but it's about the context. We've been doing this work since 2007, and we do it quarterly, and it's always been quite a worthwhile exercise in terms of what we're able to pick up in terms of the duplicates that are there. But if you look at it in the context of, like what you're saying, the number of payments that are going out, it's a very small number. We actually keep the figures, and I have got the figures, so hopefully this in itself will give you some comfort. So because we've been doing it since April 2007, we've been keeping the figures since then. So between April 2007 and March 23, there's a total of 2.7 million payments being made via Integra. 813 of those were duplicates. That averages 0.03% of the total value of the payments being made. The gross value is that only 70,000 are outstanding, which is again a very small percentage of the total values that are there. When we're looking at I think it's over 4 billion of value, of gross value in terms of the monies that have gone out. So the sums are small, but when we started the work, we looked at anything over £500, and then we changed it to anything over £1,000 as a duplicate, what we're looking for. So that then has meant that changed into the history of what was left outstanding. But we do a lot, so we not only do the work on the quarterly basis, we also chase on the outstanding ones from maybe a number of years ago, because of just the lag in being able to then chase for any of that money. So we don't actually have, I'm just reading, all duplicates from 21-22 and 22-23, except this current quarter, which we're chasing just now, have all been recovered. The remainder are mainly from 16-17 to 19-20, and include payments with values below that £1,000 threshold I was talking about. And it's part of ongoing work. We work with the business support team every quarter to get that figure down and to look at what's there and to try and chase up. So we have quite a good process between audit and business support to work on those duplicates and to try and get their recovery. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of comfort.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Thank you. Appreciate that explanation.
Do we have any further questions? Kenneth?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on briefly on an earlier point, which the Leader of the Council had raised. So this is about the savings and transformation tracking. Really important report. It has been a really challenging area for us. I agree with everything that Karen said in her response. And of course, the issue around about the pace and delivery of transformation was something that came up in the best value audit last year. We undertook a review of transformation on the back of that. And as Karen says, I suppose the best evidence for an improved and changed approach is precisely the reports that Karen mentioned that have come forward to the Executive and the Council, where we've been able to deliver savings in a way that we struggled to previously. I suppose the other thing I'd say is that I've chaired the Council of the Future Board both before that review took place and since. I think it does feel much more focused and much more robust now, much more focused on the issue of the required savings. I think it's still a work in progress. I still think we've got more to do. I wouldn't say I'm entirely satisfied with where we are because, and obviously we've still got a really big financial challenge in front of us. But I particularly wanted to pick up on that question of how the board was functioning now, because I think it is functioning in a way which is more robust, and I think that is helpful in terms of the challenges thrown up by this audit.
Thank you. I'd first like to say thank you very much for the report and what's gone into it. I appreciate it's been a tasking year at the beginning when you had vacancies. I do have two final questions myself, if I may. One is I'm a safety compliance auditor myself in my day job, so I'm a little bit concerned around the Legionnaire management and its delay. I'm wondering when the full report will be available. That's question one. And the second one is regarding the continuous auditing. It says that 15 potential duplicate payments were identified, 9 have been recovered. I'm just wondering what's happening with the remaining 6. Thank you.
So the Legionella audit work is completed, and the findings, part of that normal process is obviously it goes back to the auditee. You will appreciate that it covered lots of different services, divisions, and all of those findings have to go back to be checked for accuracy, and then also for acceptance of recommendations, responsible owners and implementation dates. And that's the stage we're at just now. So that's all of that work has been done, it's completed, and you will receive the findings and the summary of that audit to the next audit committee, because we will be getting those responses back probably in the next week or so. It's just the coordination then of all of the stuff that goes out to come back, but you can be assured that the work has been completed and that you will get the findings from that at the next audit committee. Your second question about the continuous auditing. When the report was written, we were in the process of trying to recover some of the duplicate payments. So that was the position then. I have got the latest, and there's a gross value of 18,000 for January to March. Again, this represents 0.012% of the 50,542 payments made. So they are being recovered now. Part of what I said earlier about our work with business support, they take immediate action always to try and recover the monies, or if it's a supplier that we work with a lot, there's a credit note facility obviously to try and balance that out. So you should take some comfort that the work is progressing, to recover all of them, and anything that isn't recovered we keep a note of and we go back with to see what stage it's at, to ensure that every action that can be taken is being taken.
Thank you, Isabel. Any final other questions? No. In that case, then, do we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agree. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that concludes this morning's meeting. Thank you for attending.